In this lesson, before we delve too much into the interface of Maya, which is a pretty big thing to learn, what I want to do is go over some of just basic modeling things, get you kind of used to kind of just working in the program, kind of dealing with some objects, since basically the objective of the course is to teach students how to build things and to make models. I'd like to, get people's feet wet and kind of just get them looking at some models and forms very easily and kind of moving around. Went over a little view controls, which we'll continue going over. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over the screen again. Here's our Cartesian plane, our grid. So if you want or don't want a grid, you can go to this little control here, which is one of the panel toolbar controls. So I can switch it on, switch it off. At first, I would suggest just staying with the basics in Maya. Don't mess around too much because, you'll be new to the program. You might forget, or you might have to go back to lesson. But what I want to do right now is just to go over quickly how to make some simple forms, how to view them, how to move around with them, how to move them a little bit, and that's it. Then you can kind of just make some, really basic stuff on your own. So the key thing I want to do right now is I want to go up here to, this is called our shelf. You'll be using this a lot, and we'll go over this in more detail later. Right now, this is just at the most basics. If you open up Maya and you don't see this shelf, you'll see these little tabs here. Hit the poly modeling tab, okay? So these are a quick way to get little objects. So the first one, we're gonna hit the first one, which is a sphere. You have a sphere, you have a cube, you have a cylinder, you have a cone, you have a torus, a plane, and a disk. Okay, so the first one is a sphere. Okay, so there we have our sphere here. And I went over some of the view controls, but I will go over them again. So if I want to tumble the object around, I can do the Alt or Option key and left mouse button. I can do the Alt or Option key and mid mouse button to pan. And what I want to do right now is I want to dolly, which will be the Alt and the right mouse button, or Alt Option right mouse button, or your scroll wheel if you have one. Okay. And sometimes you'll have to adjust, so you might have to pan a little bit. But there's another easy way too, what I've gone over to is with the F key. So that's for framing an object. All right, so by default, it's selected. So if I unselect, if I just click off in space, you'll see it gets unselected. So, but if I want to select it, I'll pick it again, okay? Now I'll show a quick trick for just some other displays here that might be useful for you. You may want to see the wireframe. That's just the actual wire mesh of the model, which makes up the model. This is a shaded mode. And there's these little buttons here, these little shade control buttons here. And you can also press this one, which is kind of interesting because this gives you wireframe and it gives you a shaded mode, okay? Sometimes that's helpful when you're modeling. Sometimes it's also helpful just when you want to see your form. So just remember, just these three little buttons here, and when you mouse over them, sometimes you'll get a little pop-up window that tells you what's going on there. And again, if you want to switch off the grid, switch it on, off, okay? So now I'm going to dolly out a little bit. Okay, so what I can do is now I'm just going to select this. You can just select it, and you can just hit your delete key. Okay, and that's how you just clear a model. Just get rid of it. Okay, so the next thing that I will go on to is the cube. Okay, so there's our cube. Let me switch this off. Here, well, let me select it. Let me frame it with the F key. And there it is. So here's a good reason you might want to have this wireframe on, because when you see it like this, especially cube, you're not really seeing the edges. So sometimes this is a mode I like to use. It just gives me, then I know what's happening with the object. But it's up to you, whatever you like. Some people like to model all in wireframe. So that is our cube. All right, so now I'm going to select this And I'm going to, so I did left mouse button, select, and then I'm going to hit delete. Okay. So the next thing would be a cylinder, and the cylinder is quite large. Let me go actually. Yeah, here we go. So that's a cylinder. And I will show you how to modify these things afterwards. These are just the default forms. Okay, I'm going to give it a cone. There's a cone. Pretty simple. I'm going to hit delete key. There's a torus. Hit delete key and go away. Here's a plane. Plane is useful. Sometimes you want to put a ground in your scene. So here I am. I'm using my middle mouse button, my scroll wheel. So I'm scrolling in and out here. Here I'm going to use my Alt and my Option key and right mouse button. That will zoom in. Or like I said, I can use the F key and that will zoom in. Okay. And left mouse button, select. Click off on the side, deselect. Okay. So I'm going to select it. Hit delete key. I'm going to delete it. Okay. And the last element we're going to go with is a disk. Okay. Now I see all these lines because this is what actually makes up the model. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off the wireframe again. So this now looks all nice and clean. Okay, I'm going to switch off the grid. There we go. There's just a basic disk there. All right, so that's the basic of these forms. You can just play around, just popping some of these in, seeing what they do. I mean, see what they're like, see how does the deal. Use your mouse controls, your keys, different combinations between Alt and Option key, and your left, mid, or right mouse buttons. Okay, that's the essentials. And this would give you the basics of everything you would need just to get something, at least started on a very simple level. Okay. All right. So, another thing too is if you want to reset your whole file after you're done, you can just go to New Scene. And you say, don't save, because it's something here that I really want. Okay, there you go. That is the most basics just for your very simple, what they call primitive objects.